Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of 5 Question Friday, where I do my best to answer your questions. And today we've got 5 great questions as always. Here we go. So question number 1, a fascinating question. What is a good or best financial app, think budgeting, for those with a learning disability? I spent a lot of time on this question, and so that's question 1. Question 2, is 3% safe withdrawal rate the new 4%? Number 3, how do you model tax-free income in Boldin, which is a retirement planning tool that we use? Number 4, in what account type should you hold cash you plan to spend in the first few years of retirement? And then finally, what inflation rate should you assume in retirement? So a lot of retirement questions, but we're going to start with a question I got from a viewer named Amy. Which money management app would you recommend for someone with learning disabilities? She is pretty tech savvy, but needs something very simple to understand anything math related. That's a great question. And I think it can come up in a lot of different contexts beyond a learning disability. You or someone, a loved one or someone you're trying to help could have OCD, ADHD, or maybe just sort of this view that you're not good at with money. You've just struggled with it, and you've sort of got this self-talk, and you're sort of down on yourself on how you manage money. And are there some apps that might be better than others depending on the exact set of circumstances? So I am going to show you 2 apps that you might consider. Before I do, though, just a couple more general thoughts. One is, sometimes maybe for some folks, you don't want any app. Right? Maybe a piece of paper and a pencil is a better way to go, depending on your circumstances, keeping in mind that you don't have to track every single category in a budget. You may be struggling with a certain 1 or 2 or 3 categories of spending, and I'm going to show you ways to do that in an app. But for you, maybe just keeping track of your spending on a piece of paper for a couple of categories might go a long way to helping you deal with whatever money issues you're struggling with. Or maybe it's as simple as a spreadsheet with, tracking it that way. So again, I think it's going to depend on the circumstances. The other thing I'll say is I doubt that any single app is going to be a cure-all to whatever, struggles you're dealing with. And it may be, if you're thinking about this for a loved one, it may be just coming alongside with them and helping them to the extent that they want your help. And so I guess the point is, depending on the circumstances, it's going to be about a lot more than just an app. So having said that, let me just suggest 2. Both of these are affiliates. So I basically have affiliate relationships with just about every major budgeting app out there, which means if you sign up for one, I get a fee. However, none of the budgeting apps or any apps, or any company for that matter, sponsors this YouTube channel or this video. They don't even know I'm talking about them, let alone approving it. Life is too short for sponsored videos. I just don't like them, for me anyway. All right. So the first one is Monarch Money. Now, this is a demo account. And at first, I wasn't going to suggest this one. And this is the dashboard. One of the things, depending on the circumstances, is something like this could be just totally overwhelming. It's like, oh, what in the world's going on here? The good news with Monarch is you can customize the dashboard. I can get rid of, you can just uncheck. If all I want to see is my budget, right, I can just uncheck all of these and clean up this dashboard and make it very simple. And that's the thing about Monarch. As you'll see, I think it's fair to say that Monarch has more features than any budgeting app, at least that I've seen, that's available today. And I'll show you some more examples as it relates to the budget, but I'll just stop there. I could, of course, just go down to this widget if I wanted to simplify things. However, that's not why I think this might be a good option. It gets to the budget. So when we come to the budget, again, this can look overwhelming, but I'm going to show you different ways we can simplify it. The first thing to note is that we can collapse here any categories where we don't want a budget. Of course, we could just delete the category altogether, but we can collapse it so that it only shows us those categories that we want to track. It's number 1. 2, in terms of coming up with a budget, if I click in here, it gives me information that allows me to easily set a budget. I can see how much I spent last month, and if I just click it, it just automatically, there's no math involved. I just click that number, and it sets my budget to what I spent last month, or I can set it to the average over 6 months. Again, it's just clicking a button. Of course, I could just type in whatever I want if I want a different number. And the nice thing is, when you connect your checking account and say your credit cards, you'll get some historical data. I believe how much you get depends in large part on your financial institution. But in my experience, you have this kind of data, or at least a certain amount of it, right away. Obviously, if a few months go by, you'll have a full 6 months worth of data. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you'll see that the expenses are grouped. These are called groups in Monarch Money, and you can create your own groups. It's not hard to do. You'd go up to the settings button here, but you can create your own groups, rename them, name them however you want, and then when you create a category, you assign it to whatever group you want. And so you can make this screen look as simple or complicated as you want, but it goes further than that. Let's go back to auto and transport, for example. And let's imagine, I'm going to show the categories we're not budgeting for, but let's imagine we are. I'm just going to throw in some numbers. Gas, I don't know, how much do we spend on gas? $2.50. Parking, we'll say, is $50. I'm just throwing some numbers in. This can get, depending on how many categories you want, may get overwhelming, right? One of the features, and I've not seen this in other budgeting apps, but maybe it's there. One of the features is you can budget by group rather than individual categories. So I could come up here and select this toggle, and I could say, for this group, I want to budget by group. You can have it roll over month to month, any leftover spending if you want, but we'll just save that. And what it does is it gets rid of all of these individual budget items. You still track your spending by category, but in terms of budgeting, you're now budgeting all of these together. And again, if you click in here, you get the same information, but it's at the group level. So it's adding up all of your spending for all of these categories. Again, you can easily pick what you want. You can type in a different number, but you're budgeting by group now. And so again, that strikes me as something, particularly if you're a bit intimidated by numbers or you have a learning disability, it could simplify things in a way that I think folks might find useful. So you can make the budgeting process really simple in Monarch Money. The other thing you can do is, we're grouped here by category groups, right? That's how this is set up. And that's probably, I guess, the normal way, I think, or the most common way to organize expenses. But you can also, in the settings link here, you can do what Monarch calls a flex budget. All this really does is change the groups, right? And if you select that, the groups change to fixed, flexible, and non-monthly. So fixed, again, you see the examples in this demo account: water, gas, phone. Flexible would be things like groceries and shopping and clothes. And then if you have some non-monthly expenses, home improvement, medical, things that don't necessarily happen every month, they're in this non-monthly. Again, you have control over which categories go into which group. But this is another way to really simplify your budget, to use that, again, they call it flex budgeting right here. The other thing I'll mention, in terms of setting up your budget amounts, you recall that if we drop into any one budget item, we can select based on the historical numbers. Well, the other thing we can do is come over here and we can just say, recalculate every budget item we have based on historical information. And it just recalculates everything for you with the click of a button. And of course, again, you could obviously go in and change all of that. But it was all of these features. And by the way, I think that just gives you a sense as to how feature-rich Monarch Money is, which is the budgeting tool. I use about 10 budgeting tools at a time because I'm testing things. But in terms of the actual app that we're using, we've used a lot of different apps in the past. We use Monarch Money, and we're just talking about one aspect of this tool, specifically budgeting, and you can see the features. So again, setting it up, I don't think is too overwhelming. It might be for someone, but if you can help them, you can create a budget that it can be almost as simple as you want it to be. And so that's one option. The second option I'll mention is Simplify, Oh, let me see if I can stay logged in. I actually like their dashboard a little better than Monarch Money. This is a demo account as well. I was looking to see if you can remove these widgets to simplify the homepage. I don't think you can, but in any event, this is just the dashboard. They budget in a different way than Monarch does, but I think it could resonate with some folks. They call it a spending plan, and they divide it into these sections. So you have income, which is what you're seeing here, bills. So again, your monthly bills. Your spending plan. Now you can see in this demo, they've got 6 categories. We'll come back to that in a second. Anything that you spend that's not categorized here goes into just what they call other spend. At the moment, it's blank. And then you can also have goals. So in this demo, they have a goal for a home down payment and for a car. The thing I like about this is when you open this up and you're starting from scratch, there's nothing in your spending plan. And you decide which categories you want in your spending plan. Now, of course, you could put them all in. But what I have found is that if someone's struggling to get, paycheck to paycheck, or they've got some spending where they just go over every month, it's usually not every single category, right? I mean, you can only put so much gas in your car. It's usually things like you see here: entertainment, maybe coffee shops or eating out, maybe it's shopping. So you could choose to only put in your spending plan those categories that are your trouble categories. And so if tracking everything is overwhelming, you don't need to, right? We could say, well, look, my problem isn't groceries, so let's just delete this, and we'll delete pets, and we'll delete gas and fuel, and I only want to see these 3. These are the 3 that are causing me the most difficult, most challenges. Now, keep in mind, all your spending is still being tracked. So, for example, the reason this is 0 is because in this demo, the transactions stop in April, and the spending plan is showing us August, the current month, right? But let me just add I'll just add a new transaction. We'll just say, it doesn't matter who the payee is, it's today's date. And the amount is $250, let's say, and we'll categorize it as charity donations. If we go back to our spending plan, we're not tracking charities and donations. And so it gets tracked. Now, in your actual use of this tool, if you're connecting your checking accounts, you wouldn't have manually entered the transaction like I just did. It would get brought in automatically. But here's the thing, it wouldn't show up here because it's in a category you're choosing not to track. Now, it will show up here. Here it is, in your other spend. So the tool is still tracking the expense, which you want it to do. But being able to simplify the spending plan and only focus on the categories that matter to you from a true sort of how is this going to change my day-to-day decisions, my week-to-week decisions, you can track as many or as few categories as you want. Now, by the way, there would be ways to do this in Monarch as well. And as for that matter, I'm sure other budgeting apps. I just kind of like the way Simplify does it. You can see here, by the way, it shows you, if you hover over it, it'll show you what you've spent so far this month. And we could even just real quick, and then we'll move on to the next question. But if we added another transaction, the amount's $25, and we'll say it's, I think we were tracking coffee shops, right? We can see how this looks. You get a visual where it shows you you've spent 33% of your budget, and if you hover over it, it shows you I spent 25. I've got a planned budget of 75, so I've got $50 left for the month. I just think this could be a very user-friendly. It's not math-intensive. You can limit what you see. I really like this implementation that Simplify has come up with. So those are 2 suggestions. I'll leave links to both of them below the video. Obviously, if maybe you deal with some of these issues on your own and you found either these budgeting apps helpful or maybe others. So leave a note, in the comments below the video. Let us know what's worked for you if you're willing to, to share that information. All right. Next question. Is the safe withdrawal rate of 3%, the new 4%? This came from Paul. He said, today I attended a seminar, this happens to be Fidelity and their page here, which I will link to, but it's, I just open it up real quick. It's a note on Fat Fire and how much you should be saving. Fat Fire is FIRE is financial independence, retire early. Fat Fire is someone who does this with a lot of money. And you say, well, okay, that's fine, Rob. What's a lot of money? Well, people define it a different way. Some define it as with a spend of $100,000 or more a year. Some define it as assets of some amount. Let's say, I don't know, 5 million or more. There is no official definition of Fat Fire, but that's what the article is about. And Paul, I assume he thinks this is too low, but I wasn't actually completely clear from his email. But here's the punchline that he said. You need to save 33x your income and use a safe withdrawal rate of 3%. And that got me thinking. We had Bill Bernstein on the show on Monday night, and he's written a number of books. In fact, here's one of them, 4 Pillars of Investing, great book. And he kind of used 3% as the new 4%. Remember, 4% comes from Bill Bengen in his 1994 paper. And it represents the worst case scenario for a retiree over a 30-year retirement dating back to 1871. Bill Bengen's paper only went to 1926 only. But the research has gone back to 1871. And if you wonder, well, why those dates? It has to do with the availability of data, returns data, inflation data. But 4% is the worst case. But in every year, every retirement year, you could have retired, started with 4%, meaning 4% of your retirement savings. You'd spend that in year one, adjust that amount by the rate of inflation each year, and your money would have lasted at least 30 years. But a lot of folks think that maybe that's not so good going forward, in part because of how expensive so many stocks are today. And some think 3% is a better rule. Bill Bengen himself, by the way, just came out with a new book. He thinks 4.7% is the new rule. So what's going on here? Who's right? Who's wrong? And how does that relate to FIRE? So just a couple of thoughts here. First of all, with FIRE, it depends on what you mean. So someone could retire at 60 and think that's early retirement. I guess if we view 65 as the traditional retirement, maybe 60 is early retirement, but then someone else could come along and retire at, I don't know, 37. What should they do? If we're talking extreme retirement, 30s and 40s would be my definition of extreme retirement. I guess 20s is what, does anyone retire in their 20s? Anyway, maybe you do. I personally could not see myself retiring at that young of an age with an initial withdrawal rate higher than 3. That has probably, to be honest, nothing to do with historical analysis, the 4% rule, Bill Bengen's views on it, Morningstar's views on it. It's just, that's an awfully long time to truly be retired. And to pull the trigger on that and be spending more than 3% and hoping that my money can last 60 years, probably not. And by the way, that has nothing to do with Fat Fire, because we're talking about percentages. Let's say I had $100 million. Wouldn't that be nice? If you start out spending $4 million a year and you're going to adjust that number for inflation, it's the same math. So the number doesn't matter in this analysis. I mean, it matters to you and me in real life, but in terms of a safe withdrawal rate, it's a percentage to start with, 4%. So it doesn't matter if you're Fat Fire, lean Fire, whatever, it's still a percent. And if I were in the what I'll call extreme FIRE community, and again, my view is retiring in your 30s or 40s is pretty extreme, I personally wouldn't be comfortable with a withdrawal rate much over 3%, just given the length of the retirement that I'm planning for. But more broadly speaking, is 3% the new 4%? And I don't believe it is, but I need to explain why. Here's the reality. We have no idea what the future holds. We know what history looks like. We don't know what the future holds. It could very well be that if you retire this year, as things progress over the next 30 years, maybe the safe withdrawal rate will turn out to be 3%. Of course, we're not going to know that, right, for quite a while. That could very well be true. I won't argue with anyone that the future may look very different than the past. But the question is, based on what we know today, why would we think that the 4% rule is no longer valid going forward and that 3% is a more probable outcome? I think some folks will say because of the rich stock valuations in the market, particularly in U.S. stocks. And let's take a look at that. If we use the Shiller PE, this is commonly cited to say that U.S. stocks are expensive. The Shiller PE, so first the PE is a price to earnings ratio. It can be calculated a lot of different ways, but it's what's the price of one share of a company or an index, and what's the earnings for that share. So it's as simple as that. And what the Shiller PE does is say, well, normally you look at earnings over a 12-month period, either the trailing 12 months, what happened over the last year, or some projection, some estimate of what earnings will be over the next 12 months. But what the Shiller PE says is that's not good enough. What we want to look at is our earnings over the past decade. And what we're going to do, we're going to adjust each of those years' worth of earnings by inflation. And then we're going to calculate the PE over that period of time because it allows us to look at a full business cycle. And so if we do that, you can see that we're not at an all-time high, but boy, we're awfully close. This was 1999, so this was a really expensive time, and we all know what happened after that, right? The market went down 3 years in a row. The tech bubble burst. It was brutal. But even discounting that, we're pretty high. The thing, though, that needs to be stressed, there's really two things that I think need to be stressed as it relates to the safe withdrawal rate. The first is that this is the PE ratio of the S&P 500. We can look at the total U.S. stock market, which is very, very close to the S&P 500, and you can see that the price to earnings, now this is not the Shiller PE, right? But this is just a more standard way to calculate it, is 23. That's still pretty high. It's 23. And by the way, we could look at the S&P 500. We'll just use VOO, which is a Vanguard S&P 500 index fund. It's going to be a little higher than what we just saw. Yeah, so it was just under 23. Now we're just over, or 23.5, 23.6. So historically still very expensive. But here's the thing. Most people don't have all of their stock investments in the S&P 500 or even a total U.S. stock market fund. Some folks have international. A lot of folks have some additional exposure to, say, small cap companies. And so if we go back to Morningstar, here's an international index fund. This is Vanguard's VXUS. The PE is only 15, just under 15. We can go to Vanguard's small cap. This is U.S. stocks. It's 17. So the point is that, the Shiller PE is quite high. We can go back to it. But so what? The real question is, how expensive is your portfolio? How expensive is my portfolio? My portfolio is a lot cheaper than the S&P 500 because I have significant exposure to international stocks. I have significant exposure to small cap stocks. And so what really matters is how expensive your portfolio is. Again, the Shiller PE is not irrelevant, particularly on the large growth side of U.S. stocks. They are very, very expensive. And a correction is coming. There's no question we're going to see a bad market maybe for a few years. Don't know when it will happen. But, trees don't grow to the sky. And stocks don't just keep going up and up and up on a valuation basis forever. So eventually what you see here, this line will come down. When? I don't know. How much? I don't know. But eventually it will. And no doubt my portfolio will go down when that happens, but only part of it, because I am far more diversified than the S&P 500. That's the first point I want to make as it relates to the safe withdrawal rate. But the second one is that I'm not as pessimistic about the 4% rule because it's really inflation that kills the withdrawal rate. Yes, markets matter. And if you start a retirement when markets are really, really low, the safe withdrawal rate tends to be higher. And when you start with markets that are high, like they are, at least for U.S. large cap stocks, safe withdrawal rate tends to be lower. but it's inflation that really drives that, and I can show you that here. This is an article, I'll link to it below the video, and we'll get rid of this, and I'm going to move over here. This is a graphic from that article that's from the Kitces website, and it shows you, based on the benefit of hindsight, using historical data, what the safe withdrawal rate would have been for a 60-40 portfolio, dating back, and I know it's a little blurry, but again, I'll link to the article, dating back to 1871. This red line, that's where we get the 4% rule. That's 1966. That was a bad year. Now, why is that the worst year? Why isn't, for example, where's 1929? 1929 is right in here. Well, you had a safe withdrawal rate of 4.5%, and 30, 31, it even went above 5%. That's the Great Depression for crying out loud. Why is this so bad? I mean, from 1929 into, I want to say 31 or 32, the market was down 90%. Why isn't the red line over here? Answer, inflation. The inflation of the 70s and early 1980s, often above double digits, absolutely clobbered retirees. The point isn't that, the point I'm making is not that stock markets don't matter. They matter a lot. But what's really going to kill a retirement is high inflation. And you may be saying, well, Rob, we're going to have high inflation. Have you seen our debt, our interest payments? Something bad's going to happen. You could be right. I don't know. But what I do believe is that stock returns generally, eventually converge to some average. They go up, they go down, they average. I don't think inflation quite works that way, in my view. I think it's very difficult to look at the current inflation rate and say, well, it's going to eventually revert to the mean. I think there's just too many unknowns as it relates to inflation. And so I'm not here to predict that we're going to have runaway double-digit inflation for a decade like we did in the 70s and early 80s. We might, and if we do, yeah, the 4% rule could end up not working. But I'm just not as bearish, I guess is the word. I think I said bullish, but I'm just not gloom and doom on the 4% rule, recognizing that we don't know what the future is going to hold. Maybe we will have terrible inflation. Maybe there could be any other kind of events that are difficult to predict, and the result could be a safe withdrawal rate for a given year, again, assuming a 30-year retirement, that's much lower than 4%. That could happen. It's just that I'm not convinced, based on what we see today, that it's going to happen. And for those that say, well, the future stock returns won't be as great as they were over the last 50 years, that may be true. But remember, we experienced really bad markets, and the 4% rule still survives. So simply saying that we're going to have a bad decade or that returns won't look like they did in the past, I don't think is enough to reach the conclusion that the 4% rule isn't still a valid at least rule of thumb for traditional retirements. Again, I know the question was specifically related to FIRE, but I wanted to address that. At least that's my view. By the way, don't email me 30 years from now when I turn out to be really wrong. But yeah, what can I do? That's my take on it. All right. Number 3, how do you model tax-free income in Boldin? This is from Mark. He's a member of the clergy. He gets tax-free housing. And I think it's actually easy to do unless I'm missing something. So here's a demo of Boldin. This is the retirement planning tool we use. So how would I do that? Well, I would come to income. It is a little counterintuitive because I would actually create a pension. And I'll show you why I would do this. We'll say it's for me, monthly. Yeah, we'll say we're currently receiving it. And we'll say housing allowance, right? That's what it was. He's getting a housing allowance. And let's just say it's, I don't know, $1,500 a month. Whoops, not $150,000, $1,500. And you could set it maybe, until you retire. Maybe it's lifetime. I don't know. But you could set the end date. We'll just keep it a lifetime. If there's an increase in it, you could set that. You could either use a historical rate of inflation, which is 2.54%. You could customize it, but we'll leave that blank. But here's where the magic happens. Is it taxable? No. There could be a survivor benefit. That's common with pensions. I don't know about housing allowance, but if there is, you could put that in here. But we'll just assume no. And there you go. It's tax-free. It's not taxable. Yeah, tax-free, same thing. Save it. And wouldn't that be nice? A tax-free housing allowance. I like it. Anyway, there you go. I think it's pretty straightforward. I don't think I'm missing anything. Yeah, that's how I would do it, Mark. All right. Number 4. In what account type should you hold cash you plan to spend in the first few years of retirement? This comes from Joe. He says he's got traditional Roth and brokerage accounts. I plan to continue to max out the retirement accounts, but I also want to build my brokerage account to fund 5 years of retirement. In his view, he wants to sort of have this buffer on sequence of returns risk, and he wants it in cash. So what's his question? Traditional thinking is to withdraw from the retirement account first, then traditional, then Roth. But if I convert the ETFs in the brokerage to bonds or a money market, the taxes could be crippling. Is there a better way to structure the brokerage account, or am I overthinking or thinking about this all wrong? This is where we just have to remember that money is fungible. So here's how I would do it. Let's assume that in the first 5 years you want to spend cash and you want to take it out of a retirement account, right? But the thinking was, should I put it in my brokerage account where I have access to it? And the thing is this, you can put whatever you want in whatever account and deal with it when you take the money out. So let me explain. You could stick with stock ETFs in a brokerage account, which are stock index ETFs, very tax efficient. That's what we do. And let's say you're going to spend that first in retirement. That you want to spend that first. You don't want to tap your retirement account, let's say because of taxes. But again, you're saying, well, Rob, I want to spend cash the first 5 years, and you've just told me to put my brokerage account in stock index ETFs. I don't get it. Well, here's the thing. If you still want to hold 5 years of cash, put that in your retirement account, whether it's a money market, a bond fund, whatever. You've got that in your retirement account. So it's not hitting your tax returns every year. It's protected in your retirement account. If it's a traditional, you'll eventually pay taxes when you pull the money out. But remember, we're focused on the first 5 years of retirement. So, all right, we get to year 1 and you want to say pull out $50,000, and this is where the problem comes in, right? Because you want to spend the cash. It's in your retirement account, but you want to pull the money out of your brokerage account. How do you do that? Well, you cash in $50,000 of those stocks index ETFs and you spend the money. Now here you say, well, that doesn't work. I wanted cash. And Rob, you might be asking, what if stocks are down that year? Maybe they've fallen 30%. I don't want to sell my stock index. Isn't that the whole point? We don't want to sell in a down market. Don't worry, because when you cash in $50,000 of your stock index ETF to spend in year 1, you're going to log into your retirement account where you've got your 5 years worth of cash, short-term fixed income kind of fund, whatever. Let's say it totals $250,000. You're going to take 50 of it and buy stocks. So you're just going to effectively move the stock investment that was in your brokerage account that you've sold and you're going to spend, and effectively moved it into your retirement account by selling $50,000 worth of your money market fund or your fixed income fund and investing it into whatever asset class of stocks you want inside your retirement account. It's really that simple. Now, you always want to manage taxes. Are you selling at a loss in your brokerage account? In which case you want to avoid the wash sale rule, even inside a retirement account. It's easy to do. Just invest in a similar but different kind of stock index fund. But maybe it's at a gain, and so you're going to think about the tax consequences of selling, but it's presumably, let's hope, long-term capital gains. And it's just the tax is just on the gains, not the underlying tax basis. So yeah, that's how I would do it. I would stick with stock index ETFs in my brokerage account. When I retired, I would cash in what I needed, go over to my retirement account, pull the money out of the cash, put it in stocks to maintain that allocation. And pretty straightforward. All right. Number 5, what inflation rate should you assume in retirement? And this is from John. Can you talk about how to budget and estimate retirement costs, specifically what inflation rate one should use? I thought this was a perfect way to end this video because we're already talking about inflation, the risks it poses to retirees, the double-digit inflation of the 70s. So what should we assume? So a couple of things to think about. One is, and I'll show you this in Boldin. When you think about inflation and the assumptions, and you set them here in rate assumptions, and you can set 4 different inflation rates in Boldin. just the general inflation rate, medical, the Social Security cost of living adjustment, and housing. Particularly with this general inflation, you want to set it with your rate of returns assumptions. You want to keep those in mind. These are related. If we go back to accounts, we open up, and I'll just walk through this slowly. We'll just use the 401k as an example. You have to set an assumption here too for your returns. And this assumption is what they would call nominal, meaning we're ignoring inflation for a moment. So you'll set it, they have some presets you can use, you can customize it. Let's say you customized it and you said, Rob, I am very pessimistic with what's going on in the world. And I'm just going to assume, even for I've got a lot of stocks in this account, but I'm just going to assume 2%. And then you come over to rate assumptions and you say, Rob, I am very pessimistic. I'm going to assume 10%. Can you even put 10% in Boldin? Will you allow it? Okay, what you've just done is you've assumed 2% on returns, 10% on general inflation. So when you put those together, you're assuming that on an after inflation basis, you're going to lose 8% every year throughout your 30 or 40-year retirement. That's not a negative, pessimistic view. That is I almost want to say it's an end of world kind of assumption, but maybe that's taking it a little too far. It's really assuming something so bad. It's hard to imagine a retirement plan that could actually be successful with those assumptions. So when you set your inflation, you want to think about it in terms of your rate of return assumptions. And I probably never assume, you could assume a slightly negative real return for some period of time. We certainly probably experienced that from the late 60s into the early 80s, but you don't want to get too carried away with it. I don't know, in this plan, I only set that rate of return for one account, and I'm using, let's see, I'm in average, and you can see it just tanked my chance of success to a point where I'm probably not, it's no longer a reality when I've gotten that extreme. So the takeaway is when you set your inflation, you want to think about your rate of return assumptions as well. That's number one. Number two, keep in mind that some of your spending may not adjust for inflation. So if you go into retirement with some debt, maybe you've got a car loan, maybe you still have a mortgage, at least on the principal and interest, assuming it's a fixed rate, that's actually not going up by the rate of inflation, right? So you may have some expenses that don't go up by the rate of inflation. They're fixed. So you want to kind of factor that in. And then the third thing to think about, again, is you can set different rates of inflation, and that makes sense. For example, with medical, we know that healthcare has gone up faster than the overall general rate of inflation. With Boldin, you can set that separately. Okay, now we finally get, though, to, all right, Rob, that's fine, but what should the number be? What I tend to do is, as an initial point, I sort of use an historical rate, but I don't use this one that Boldin gives us because it just seems too, I get that it's an average, that just seems too low to me. So what I tend to use is, I tend to use 3% as sort of my starting assumption. I can then very easily toggle pessimistic and optimistic to see different assumptions, and you can see it here. If I assume 3%, the optimistic is 2.5, 2.4, and the pessimistic is 3.6. The one potential downside to this is that if I choose, it doesn't matter, let's say pessimistic, that not only uses this 3.6% rate of inflation that you see here, it also uses all of my pessimistic rate assumptions. So let's put this back. Let's just say I use 8%. It's going to use this pessimistic rate of return. Now, that's not a problem per se, but what if I want to look at a higher rate of inflation but with average returns? Well, I need to customize this to do that. And this is the real thing I want to stress. You can create other scenarios in Boldin and use different assumptions. And so I could use 3% here, and we'll go back to average. And then I could create a new scenario that says, well, what if it's 5%? Now I could just do it here and see what the difference is. So I don't have to create another scenario, or I can create another scenario, have a higher assumption, and then compare the two, right? This is the real thing I want to stress though. Don't think of the assumption that you have to make as one number. You really need to stress test your retirement plan in a number of ways, but one of them is inflation. So you get your plan in as best as you can, you know, all the data as reasonable as you think you can make it. You can use whatever you want for inflation. I tend to use something close to the historical average, as I said, 3%, but then I'm going to start making changes. Well, what if it's 5%? What's that going to look like? You know, what if it's really bad and it's 8%, right? And so that's the point. You want to stress test your portfolio and see what the results are. And that'll tell you just how sensitive your plan is to these assumptions. Keeping in mind one other thing. To me, inflation matters the most with those expenses you can't avoid. You know, your housing expenses, you know, healthcare, food, clothing. It matters for other expenses like traveling and eating out and all those sorts of things, but you have more control over those, right? So if inflation really gets bad, you can just maybe skip some traveling. I mean, you may not want to do it, but you could. You probably can't skip your next meal, you know, or, you know, you got to pay your utilities. And so I also sort of dive down into what are my expenses that I absolutely have to cover in retirement, and what if inflation is higher for those? But for other expenses, more flexible expenses, you know, I still factor in inflation, but I realize that I have more control over those expenses. And that's, I think, it's very natural for folks when inflation is high to cut back, and you cut back on those kinds of expenses that you can. So that's what I do. I don't know if it's the best approach. Maybe you use a different approach, and if you do, love to hear about it in the comments below. I tend to start with something near the historical inflation rate, and then I play around with it and see just how can I break my retirement plan? What kind of inflation rate would I need to break my retirement plan? And how robust then is my plan? If just a little bit of inflation is going to really cause me some big problems, then, you know, I want to think about other ways and changes and things I might be able to do, work a little bit longer. You know, it may not be your ideal, but maybe that's the best for your plan, or working a little bit of part-time or cutting back in some ways. Again, depends on your specific circumstances, but that's my approach. So there you go. Appreciate you watching the show. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Be happy to help you out any way I can. And until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.